The objective of this short message is don't give up on Christ when the going gets tough. Thinking of the Israelites who, as soon as they hit difficulties in the wilderness, said, and it's quoted in Exodus 14 and verse 12, "It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." I read a report recently, particularly as I speak, words such as credit crunch and recession are being used widely by the media because of the economic situation that we all find ourselves in. And the report that I read concerned Karl Marx's book, Das Kapital. And it was focused on a particular German publisher. And the publisher is quoted as saying that they normally sell 200 copies of this book annually. But because of the economic recession, because people have become dissatisfied with the political and economic system that they live under, that this particular book, annual sales are now projected for 1,500 and rising. So people, just like the Israelites, are looking back and thinking that perhaps the past wasn't as bad as they thought it was at the time. Three things that I want to say in relation to our faith and this idea of not looking back, not going back on our trust in Christ. First of all, the good old days. Those of you who perhaps are British and are my age or above can remember maybe a television programme called The Good Old Days, where people would reminisce, they would sing, they would talk, and they would be focused on the good old days. Old songs, memories, all those sort of things that people would look back on. And there's no doubt that as you get older, and I find that myself, that reminiscing and looking back certainly does become more important as the years go by. But I think we need to check ourselves sometimes, because what we think were the good old days, we have to ask ourselves the question, were they really that good? When we think even 100 years ago in Britain, infant mortality, lifespan average expectancy of people was far less than it is today. Health situations, living conditions, all those things, when we look at them without the rosy-coloured spectacles that we sometimes put over our eyes, when we look at them in reality, we realise that the good old days perhaps weren't as good as we like to make out. I can remember having a telephone for the first time in our house when I was young and I lived at home. I can remember starting to be involved in missions in Africa and having no internet, no computer, relying on traditional mail system where it would take sometimes weeks to pass between us and the people in Africa. Whereas now, via internet and cafes where people can check emails, we can communicate a lot faster than we could in those days. So when we look back, the good old days, were they really as good as we imagine them to be? Secondly, the grass is always greener on the other side, but it's just as hard to cut when we get there. I recall some years ago an image that I've remembered for some reason of a horse. It was in a quite a large field. There was a hedge down the middle, and in the second section was another large field. And this horse was straining over the hedge, over the fence, to reach the grass that was in the other field. The grass was the same, it was just as good, it was identical, but somehow the horse thought that the grass over the other side of the fence was better. And I think that we can get like that sometimes in our walk with God. We can certainly get like that in life. And the reference to the Karl Marx book that I read out briefly earlier highlights that how as people we're very fickle, how the Israelites were very fickle, how they wanted to go back on their faith when the going got tough, but the grass is just as hard to cut on the other side when we get there. Finally, be realistic. Jesus never promised an easy life. In this world you will have trouble, Jesus said in John 16, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Don't give up on faith at the first hurdle. Like the Israelites, they came to a difficult situation and they wanted to go back. They left Egypt rejoicing, but when the difficulties came, they wanted to go back. Don't go back on your faith. Don't give up. Hang on in there. Stick close to God. He will bring you through. Sometimes our walk with God is a difficult walk, whether through personal situations or whether through something external. Life deals us all difficult blows at times. It's not so much what happens to us, but rather how we handle it. When life's problems come against us, we can either make that situation a building block to develop our character and move on in our relationship with God, or it can become, sadly, as it does for many people, a stumbling block. And we never move beyond there, and we start to look back, and we start to think that what we've come from wasn't as bad after all, just like the Israelites. Do we give up, or do we learn and grow? That's the challenge that faces every believer from time to time. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. We just have to look closely enough. One of my favourite songs, it's a non-Christian song, but it's a wonderful inspirational song by Stevie Wonder, and it's called Tomorrow Robins Will Sing. And it tells us the story really that no matter how dark today is, that tomorrow the robins will sing. And if that's your life at this time as a believer, just hold on to the fact that no matter how dark today is, there will be light tomorrow. There is always light at the end of the tunnel when we follow Christ. So in conclusion, don't look to the past, but look to the present and look to the future. If the past was so good, why did we want to leave it behind? When we gave our hearts and our lives to Christ, why were we so glad to leave behind our past? Why were we so happy to say goodbye to those things that were in our lives before? We were happy because we knew that we didn't want to be there any longer. The Israelites didn't complain to God when he brought them out of Egypt. They only started to complain when the going got tough. The masses rejoiced when communism fell. Karl Marx's popularity also declined sharply. But the moment we have economic turmoil, the moment we have instability in our nations, people are looking for something that ultimately has already failed them. Learn from the past. Egypt didn't work. Marxism didn't work. Don't go back to something that has failed us in the past. Life without Christ is no life at all.